So I'm going to give you a little bit of an overview of the NIH SBIR program quickly, because I'm assuming most people are somewhat familiar with it. Then a little bit more detail on the NIBIB, the National Institute for Biomedical Imaging and Bioengineering, and sort of what we support in this space. And so, as you may know, the NIH is one of the largest funders of biomedical research in the world, and this actually Congress recently passed, and you might be aware, our fiscal year 2016 budget, and they bumped us up to $32 billion for this year, in the small business portion of our funding is actually going to be somewhere closer to $900 million for FY16, so not insignificant amounts of funding available for your research. And just a little bit of background for those that aren't intimately familiar, the Small Business Innovation Research Program and Small Business Technology Transfer Programs are the two really non-dilutive programs that the NIH has to support private sector innovation and commercialization, really with the idea of promoting the translation and commercialization of these ideas and innovations that the NIH has funded through its basic research program. With the STTR really being the driving program behind translating technologies out of the university setting. So just some context about the program is primarily early stage seed funding, right? So the basic research grants sort of fund the discovery. You spin out a company, and SBIR is sort of that seed capital to get you off the ground and hopefully get you to a point where private investors will be interested in funding it from there on. It's not always the case, and there are some gaps there, which I'll discuss. So the program that's been set up and mandated by Congress is a three-phase program. Phase one is supposed to be a feasibility study, proof of principle, for about 6 months to a year, and total costs are allowed up to $225,000 for that study. If you're successful and move on to phase two, you're allowed up to $1.5 million, and in some cases a little bit more, depending on the institute. That's a 2-year project. It requires a full commercialization plan, so we're really assessing not just the science, not just whether or not this is a good idea, but is there a market for this, and can it get to market and help patients? The phase 3 of the program is the commercialization stage, ideally, and before this past year, it was strictly meant to be pursued without the use of SBIR and STTR federal funding, but there's a new program to help, which I'll describe. And then, so another thing I'll get into a little bit later is outside of just the funding through phase 1 and phase 2 for the basic R&D, the NIH has over the years developed a number of programs to help bridge this gap between phase 1 and phase 2, between the end of your research with the NIH and being able to find private partners to invest. And so I'll go over these a little bit later, but there's a few of them to be aware of. So the NIH is made up of 27 different institutes and centers. They all have their own separate SBIR budgets and fund their own programs. This is just to highlight that I'm with the NIBIB. We're just one of many institutes, and we're one of the smaller ones. But we have sort of a niche mission relative to the others. So we're not disease specific. Most of the institutes are focused on cancer or diabetes or cardiovascular disease. We're agnostic to clinical application. And so our mission is strictly to support technology development. And really more what we consider platform technologies. So these are technologies that can be applicable to a broad range of diseases and are truly innovative in cutting edge. There was a gentleman this morning that mentioned that the SBIR program supports mostly boring research, and I would contend that the NIBIB supports at least the least boring or the most unboring projects at the NIH. So our mission is very broad, given that it's based solely on technology. So on the bioengineering side, we fund everything from novel biomaterials and implantables to new modeling and computational algorithm development, to in vitro diagnostic tests, surgical tools. We do tissue engineering, a bunch of stem cell research, rehabilitation, and so on. On the imaging side, supporting all the major modalities in imaging, as well as any cutting edge or novel things that are on the horizon. This includes imaging agents and image processing and software that goes along with that. And more recently, we've taken a keener focus on health IT space, and so now we're very much interested, with the advent of the Affordable Care Act and the EHRs becoming a reality, how you deal with all this data and incorporate it into making smart decisions in the clinic. So there's a lot of areas that we're here that we support. A lot of people ask us what our main focus areas of interest are, hot topics, and really we struggle enough with maintaining support for this breadth of a mission, and so we typically don't have targeted areas of support. Although I'll go over a few solicitations that we have out on the street that sort of highlight current areas that are being supported. So just a quick snapshot of our portfolio. So just over half is in the imaging space. The rest, the engineering and health IT sector. And if you break that down, and again, this is a snapshot in time, and given that the SBIR program is a 1 to 2 year grants, this is turns over quite quickly. But at least at present, this is roughly the breakdown of what we're funding. The micro nano systems tends to mostly be microfluidics and other types of diagnostic technologies, but mostly imaging, and we do a pretty good job of portfolio balance and hitting the main areas. Oh, and just to point out that our funding is roughly $10 million. That should go up a couple million next year. So just over $10 million in funding for the program, which is one of the smaller programs at the NIH, but we feel we're managing it effectively. So just a few special opportunities. We support most of our SBIR grants through the omnibus solicitations, through the general parent calls. Probably 90% or so of our portfolio comes in through investigator-initiated ideas, but there are some opportunities out there I'd like to make you aware of that we are supporting at the NIBIB and across the NIH as well. So many of you might be aware of the BRAIN initiative. This is a trans-NIH initiative, and it's broader than SBIR, but there is an SBIR arm to it that we're helping to manage. So I thought I'd bring that up. And the goal is at least of this particular PAR, and fits the NIBIB mission in that it's supporting tool development. So new methods and tools for being able to get more precise measurements, ideally down to the single neuron level in neuroscience research. Another initiative that we're focusing on is in the area of regenerative medicine, so novel bioreactors. And as an example, one of the programs, or one of the projects we just funded this past year is developing a small bioreactor for platelet generation. So they're calling themselves the Platelet Factory to be able to create a donor-free supply of platelets, which could be very impactful in the blood banking industry. Big data, I mentioned our push into health IT. So the BD2K initiative, the NIH Big Data Initiative, is a very broad-based initiative to tackle this problem of big data. And there is an arm of this, again, that's focused in on small businesses and bringing the private sector into this. The targeted themes are still fairly broad in that they would cover both bioinformatics for basic research as well as the clinical applications. But it's a call out on the street if you're interested in this space. And lastly, this is an NIBIB specific program that we've developed in partnership with the National Institute for Minority Health and Health Disparities. It's been active for 6 or 7 years now, really with the focus of trying to develop technologies that are affordable and accessible to patient populations that don't have access to the high-end, cutting-edge hospital systems and resources. And so the idea is projects coming in, partnering with a healthcare clinic or healthcare provider that sees patient populations that are considered to be health disparity populations in rural, low socioeconomic settings and urban settings, and really trying to develop technologies that are appropriate for their specific clinical needs. And an example here in the image is a company that we funded through this initiative a few years ago that's working on an image analysis software for diabetic retinopathy. So the idea is that you don't need imaging specialists necessarily or ophthalmologists locally to review images, that you can take an image, send it to the cloud, get an analysis done automatically, and send back a referral on that patient. Huge problem globally in terms of blindness from diabetes. So it's a very cool, interesting project. And then a few non-SBIR initiatives that I thought I would just mention. One is Spark, and there's a few calls out. If you go to the URL at the bottom, there's a few calls out for funding opportunities. And I mention this because they're not necessarily small business, but the private sector is going to be a big factor in making these programs successful. And so this is really targeting, electrical stimulation and its potential impact on spinal cord injury and other disorders related to paralysis. And so getting a better understanding of the underlying mechanisms, what's going on, but developing better technologies to target some of these neurological disorders. And I just wanted to give a brief pitch to the Precision Medicine Initiative. So many of you may be aware of this. It's one of the President's signature initiatives, and that we're trying to recruit a cohort of 1 million patients to get into this study. And at present, really just the infrastructure is being set up to be able to collect data and specimens from 1 million patients. But I've highlighted mobile health technologies there at the bottom, because ultimately, as the PMI goes forward, there's going to be a call to develop new and novel technologies to be able to test different clinical therapeutics and diagnostics on this cohort. So just to be aware of, in the future we will be interested in next generation sequencing and other types of portable technologies that could be deployed in this type of a cohort. Getting back to the non-SBIR funding, and really some of the resources that the NIH has brought to bear, understanding that money in and of itself isn't necessarily going to bridge this gap between NIH funding and private sector funding. So just want to go through a few of the programs that we have to address this. So the technical assistance programs have been around for probably 10 years now, with the niche assessment program being primarily for phase 1 awardees to just give them a better sense of where their best market opportunity lie. Whereas the Commercialization Accelerator Program is available to phase 2 awardees, and this is all paid for by the NIH. They get mentored assistance, helping them build out a business plan, helping them build out strategies in whatever specific area they need help with. And it's been a very successful program to date. This is the data that we have tracking all the companies that we can attribute directly to the companies that go through this program. As you can see, a lot of money raised, a lot of jobs created, so it's been a great success. And a new program that just came out this past fall, we just got our first round of applications in January, is the Commercialization Readiness Pilot Program. And this is essentially was authorized by Congress about 2 years ago, that allows the NIH Phase 3 funding authority. So we're allowed to actually spend some of our SBIR funds on non-R&D activities, on business activities. And so at least from the NIBIB's perspective, we're hopeful to use this money in small chunks, 50 to 300K roughly, to support regulatory strategy development, clinical trial planning, any intellectual property issues that you need to shore up, or manufacturing and scale up planning. So it's a new program, and you need to have a phase 2 to be eligible for it. But again, it's some extra funding that could help bridge that gap between the phase 2 development and private funding. A few other programs we've put in place over the last 2 years in the area of entrepreneurial training. So we're running 2 programs at present for phase 1 companies. And the idea is to get them to really hone their commercialization plan for their phase 2 application. And so both the I-Court, the NIH program, which we adopted from the National Science Foundation, and the Coulter College Commercializing Innovation Program, which the NIBIB has developed in conjunction with the Wallace H. Coulter Foundation, are both focused on mentoring experience for the companies. Again, to get them thinking a little bit more about their customer, their market, and where their best opportunity lie from a business standpoint, and to get them really ready to submit a competitive phase 2 application. And so just a little bit more about the C3i program. We've run it for about 2 years now. We've had about 22 companies go through the program. Again, the objective is for them to really validate their business, whether or not the NIH is funding it, so the science is presumably vetted and strong. But we wanted a program to help vet the business side, whether or not there's a market for this. And so they get paired up with mentors who sort of walk them through a number of exercises and customer discovery and the like, to really understand at the end of this, whether or not there's a market and it's the right market, or it's an opportunity to pivot and try something new in your phase 2 application before it's ultimately too late and you've wasted time and money going down the wrong path. And incidentally, we've had a few of the companies were selected to go on to present at investor forums. We have another round coming up in the fall. Just the screenshot here is from a mock Shark Tank that they do as part of the program, which is very entertaining and helps the companies better understand valuation and how you do that negotiation with potential investors. So, very interesting program. And lastly, as I've also mentioned, we're trying to push more and more of our companies to go to investor forums. So this week is obviously a great example of that with Resi and Life Sciences Summit. These are the two investor forums that we started with. We're doing a lot more in the coming years with partnering with various events that are going on, and so we are paying for our phase 2 companies largely to go to these investor forums and meet and network and try to make connections. So that's something we're becoming more and more involved in. And so lastly, I just wanted to touch on a few of the programs that are more specific to the NIBIB that are outside of the SBIR funding that we think is important as well for stimulating translation and commercialization efforts. And so this is our Biomedical Technology Resources Centers program, and the idea is to fund these large centers that can serve as a resource to the research community. And so the concept is this center becomes expert in pushing the cutting edge in a specific technology. They're required to partner and collaborate with biologists and other folks working on biological or clinical problems, and to have a nice feedback loop where the technical innovation helps solve the problems, and then in that process it helps improve the technology for future collaborations. And a big part of this program is dissemination and service, and so these centers are required as part of their mandate to partner with and to engage with researchers, small businesses and the like, to help again disseminate the technology and get it out there to be useful. And so we have about 40 centers nationwide. This is just a short list of them, and a map to show you where they're located all across here, and just to give you a sense of what types of technologies are represented. A lot in the imaging space and as well as the engineering space. And I just wanted to highlight one in particular to show you sort of the impact that these centers can have on research, and particularly in your area. So we have a center up at Tufts called the Tissue Engineering Resource Center, and they've been particularly active over the years in translation and spinning out companies and licensing their technology out. So they've developed, and you may be familiar with this program. Dr. David Kaplan runs this center, and he's really been the inventor and driver behind using silk proteins as a novel biomaterial for a bunch of different clinical applications. And so, as an example, I just listed 4 of them. There's many more examples. Just 4 companies that have been spun out are currently working with Dr. Kaplan on commercializing the technology that he developed through the center. And incidentally, and this was completely coincidental, 2 of the companies are here today and potentially in the audience, and I spoke with them earlier. Vaxis and Cocoon are both here as part of the summit. I didn't know they were going to be here. But they are, and so each of these companies is using these novel silk proteins for different clinical application and pursuing translation. And so, again, these centers are a great source. If you caught the URL earlier, go check out sort of the work they're doing and see if that's a fit. But we count on this resource research program as a big driver in our translational research efforts. And lastly, and similarly, we have another sort of research resource network that's strictly focused on point-of-care technologies. Now we currently have 3 centers being supported. 2 of them are in Boston, 1 is in Baltimore, and they all have a slightly different focus. So one's focused in cancer care, 1 in just general primary care tests, and 1 in sexually transmitted diseases. And so if you're working in the area of point-of-care diagnostics, they're just like the Biomedical Technology Resource Centers. Part of their mandate is to support these collaborations and dissemination. And so they also have funding available for RFAs, and they do fund collaborative projects as well in these areas. think that's all I have for now. So I thank you for your attention, and I'm happy to answer any questions you might have. Thank you. Sure.